Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Connecticut Literary Festival's Lit Talks. I'm Joe Coretta. I'm the curator of the Lit Talks and the director of the Connecticut Literary Festival. Tonight, thank you for coming. Parking is very tough in this neighborhood. Tonight, we're excited to celebrate the Connecticut Book Awards with Connecticut writers, and it is hosted by Lisa Comstock, who is the director of the CP Center for the Book. The festival and the talks house Central Connecticut State and English Department. That's our home, and we also have benefactors and our many people have sent us checks over the last couple of months. I want to thank them all very much for supporting us and supporting the arts, particularly in the Artways, our terrestrial home, and the CT Humanities. CT Humanities has been supporting artists and literary organizations through the entire pandemic. I want to thank them very much. Lit Talks has been going since June. This was our way around having a terrestrial festival. We were able to have writers from Seoul, South Korea, thanks to the internet, and of course, Connecticut's Wally Land. All of the talks are archived on our website, and you're welcome to watch them at any time. Wally's a lot of fun. Also, this year, we published a book. We got a grant from an anonymous donor, and we were able to publish the inaugural Connecticut Literary Anthology. The book is on sale now, and in the next 2 weeks, we're going to celebrate the book reading of all of our contributors. 36 Connecticut writers will be reading on the 10th and the 17th, and I hope you can join us for that also. If you're part of the meeting, there'll be chat going up. Please keep it clean. If you have a question for any of the writers, at the bottom, you can ask a question box, and then you'll ask your question. If there's a question you really like, you can vote for it and go to the top of the list. So I'm going to get out of your law because I'm hearing a weird echo, and you can play that in. I also want to quickly thank our production supervisor, Cristiano Torres, and our two interns, Honor and Victoria. They're going to be leaving soon, but I'm thank them for their work this past semester at Central. So have a nice evening. Enjoy all the writers. They're wonderful. And welcome to the stage, Lisa Comstock, the director of the CT Center for the Book.
Thanks, Jotham. That's great. I mean, you're doing such wonderful things, both for, the writing community within the state and pulling people together during this pandemic. And I thank you for that. And thank you for having me here and the rest of the folks who will be joining us later. So here's the thing, why this Lit Talk and why Connecticut's winners should be invited, which is, I think we should, but anyway. So Connecticut is our little corner of the world, and those with us today live in Connecticut, were born in Connecticut, or been written about Connecticut, and sometimes all three. They're also either 2020 Connecticut Book Award winners or received an honorary mention. Connecticut Book Awards celebrate Connecticut and our stories, and also celebrate the people who write these stories. Connecticut has a unique character, which is hard to pin down for those who aren't from here and familiar with our idiosyncrasies here in Connecticut. We have vast wealth and terrible poverty in Connecticut. We have a much varied landscape, hills in the northwest corner, and a significant river running through the center of the state. So that empties into Long Island Sound. Someone from rural East Granby has different stories to tell about Connecticut than someone who grew up in a smallish city like Middletown, where I live, or someone who has lived for a long time in Norwalk, or who tells a New Haven story. For such a relatively small space, Connecticut is very small compared to Texas, but we have lots and lots of different stories to tell. So I'd like to welcome Jerry Kraft first tonight. Jerry is the 2020 Connecticut Book Award winner in the Young Readers category, and a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator of the graphic novels New Kid and the newly published Class Act. New Kid won many accolades, among them winning the 2020 John Newbery Medal for Most Outstanding Contribution to Children's Literature. So welcome, Jerry.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. So my name is Jerry Kraft, and the two books you see behind me are New Kid and Class Act, which are both graphic novels. And what I am going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show the first few pages of New Kid. And this is how I do the illustrations. This is Adobe Photoshop. So the entire book is done digitally. So this is loosely based on my life. I grew up in the Washington Heights section of New York City. I was always one of the youngest and smallest kids in my grade. I wanted to be an artist. My parents did not want me to be an artist. So instead of going to art school, they sent me to Fieldston in Riverdale, much like what Jordan Banks' parents in New Kid did to him. So they sent him to a prestigious private school also in Riverdale. So I got to see the story firsthand myself for 4 years going to Fieldston School, and about 13 years from my two sons attending school in New Canaan, as well as a couple of boarding schools here in Connecticut. All right, so here I go. This is Jordan Banks. This is the first page of New Kid. This is how I feel every single day of my life, like I'm falling without a parachute. I mean, I'm not really falling. That's called a metaphor. I learned about them in English. When I was younger, I used to wish I was Superman. So instead of falling, I could fly. But now that I'm 12, I realize just how silly that was. I should have wished I was Batman. When you have a jet, you don't need to fly. And this is his mom. I'm going to try to do the voices. Don't laugh. Jordan, are you listening? Why can't you see how amazing this place is? Just look at their website, honey. You've shown me a jillion times, Mom. Yes, it's awesome. Oh, honey, I know how much you wanted to go to art school, but you're so smart. Tell him, Chuck. You are smart, Jordan. It would be such a waste. This is one of the best schools in the entire state. It looks like Harvard or something. Tell him, Chuck. Yeah, it's nice, but it still doesn't seem to have much, diversity at least. How is that helping? I'm just saying. They offer 5 languages, AP classes, the Harkness method, lacrosse, crew. What's crew? What's the Harkness method? I have no idea, but they sound wonderful. This is so exciting. Let me get my camera. Can I see what you're drawing? Nah, you won't like it. Are you kidding? I'm your biggest fan. Well, okay, Dad. So throughout New Kid, I showed Jordan Banks' sketchbook to give you a deeper insight to what he's thinking. So this is his back to school drawing to show he's really not too excited about going back to school, and especially going to Riverdale Academy Day School, where he'll be one of the few kids of color in his class. So back to school, and there's a history book and a ruler and a calculator coming through, like Godzilla, and all the video games and the Xboxes and the basketball, all the fun stuff from summer is no more. Well, the drawing is great, but let's not show Mom, okay? Yeah, I figured. Found my camera. Let's hurry before your guide arrives. Mom, please use my phone. Jordan, my dad used to take the most amazing photos with this camera. Your fingers are covering the lens. Okay, baby, smile. More. Jordan, ding dong. They're here. Come give your mommy a hug. Have a great first day of school. Oof. Come on, Jay. I'll walk you downstairs. Bye, baby. What's a guide do again, Dad? They show all the new kids around school. So, you good? I guess. Don't let anyone talk down to you. And remember to shake his dad's hand. Firm grip, eye contact. My Dad's Tips for Being a Man. Shaking Hands by Jordan Banks. The handshake is one of the most important rituals on earth. Why? I don't know. Nobody does. But here's how to do it. Step 1. Only use your right hand, even if you're a lefty. Good hand, evil hand. Step 2. Always look each other in the eye. Step 3. Remember, the firmer your grip, the more that people will respect you. Bad, better, best. You're hired. And here's some other bad things. Cold hands, sweaty hands, dirty hands, yikes, hands too rough, hands too soft, and the most important rule of all, never, ever give someone a dead fish. I have no idea what that means. but I bet it's bad. And obviously this is pre-COVID, so no one should shake hands these days. Just saying. And now here is the guide. This is Liam and his dad. Stay in the car, Liam, and lock the door. You must be Jordan. I'm Mr. Landers, Liam's father. Step 1. Step 2. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Landers. Nailed it. Chuck Banks, Bill Landers. Pleased to meet. Oof. Because his dad has a handshake like a vice. Go say hi to Liam. He can't wait to meet you. Oh, okay. Got your keys, Jordan? Yes, Dad. Wallet? Yeah. Phone? Uh-huh. Hi, Miss Neal. Good morning, Jordan. Miss Neal is the neighborhood watch. So he gets in the car. Hey, Jordan. Hey, Liam. And just 2 more pages. So the kids from around his block come. These are his friends from around his block. Sup, Coach? Hey, Miss Neal. Hello, boy. Morning, guys. Remember, we have a game on Saturday. Yeah, right. Watch. One day, I'm going to have a car just like this. Kenny, you'll be lucky if you get a skateboard. Man, forget you, Kirk, with your big head. You too, Carlos. I see you laughing. But Jordan doesn't want to be seen in this fancy car with his friends, so he hides. And then when they go by, he looks up. Whew. We'll have him back around 4. Thanks, Bill. Glad to help. We'll take all the help we can get. This whole thing is a little nerve-wracking. I know there's a big step, but when he gets out in a few years, you'll see this is the right move. And the neighbor's looking. He's not being arrested, Michelle. Oh, thank heavens. Buckle up, boys. Bye, baby. Mom. And that is the end of chapter 1. Ta-da!
Yay! Are you going to do a little drawing for us today?
Yeah, so I want to see how I'm doing on time because I don't want to hog everything. So what I can do is I'm going to go back into Photoshop, and the very next page is blank. And again, I do the entire thing digitally in Adobe Photoshop. So here's my cursor, and I will just do this quickly. Obviously, if this is for a book, I would take much more time, but I get the basis of the head in, and there's one ear, and that's the other ear, and nice little smile. Happy, usually pretty happy, Jordan Banks is. Let's get this going. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and his neck. And for his school, he always has to wear a collared shirt. So here's his collar. And then he wears a hoodie. And he always has his sketchbook with him. And so he is drawing. Here's his hand. Here is his mechanical pencil. And he's got this. Here's his other hand holding up the book. Let's make sure I get in all 5 fingers. And he always has his backpack with his strap. Going like that, and let me just shade in the hair, and voila.
Wow. Do you do that just like a digital sketch pad?
Yeah, so this is, I actually draw it on this, which is my Wacom Intuos Pro. And I'm drawing on the stylus, so I'm not actually looking at what I'm drawing. My hand is like this, but I'm looking at the screen. So it does take a little getting used.
Yeah.
So the hand-eye coordination, you got to work at. But I did all of New Kid and all of Class Act, which is the companion book. And as you see, it is a monstrous 250 pages with illustrations on every page. So it's a lot. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'd love to thank the Connecticut Book Awards for my lovely honor. Up on my trophy case with all my cool stuff. So I appreciate it.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice. Oh, thank you. It's a great book. I was going to say, we don't have a lot of time, but I love your chapter headings where you've got your dreams and your farce awakes, and but it's an important story to tell. It's a really important story to tell, and I'm glad that you told it, and encourage everybody to go out and get their very own copy of New Kid. I have my copy here.
At one of our many wonderful indie bookstores here in Connecticut.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And Christmas is coming, so there we are.
Absolutely.
Right. That and Class Act. So thank you so much. And we'll talk to you later, I guess, when some questions come up. And please, I don't know if anybody was able to hear it, or if it got muffled or something. There's an Ask a Question button at the bottom. So if you have any questions for Jerry, please put them in there, and we'll be monitoring those and answer your questions at the end of the evening, after all of the authors have had their chance to read aloud a little bit. So thank you, Jerry. We'll see you a little bit later.
Got it. Thank you.
Next, Keith Scribner will be joining us. I don't know if he's joining us. Is he coming? He's coming soon, right? So his current novel, Old Newgate Road, is the 2020 Spirit of Connecticut Book Award winner. That book is the winner, which is a special category of the Connecticut Book Awards. Just checking, he's on his way. Of the special category of Connecticut Book Awards, honoring Bruce Fraser, who was the executive director for many, many years, and he passed away about 10 years ago now. But this honors him as well as the authors who win that award. But it's also all about sense of place. It's about how Connecticut values its different senses of place. So Keith's previous novels are The Oregon Experiment, Miracle Girl, and The Good Life, which is a New York Times notable book of the year. So I'm sure he's on his way. Okay. I don't know. I'm talking to the empty room. It seems a little weird. So we do have, let's see. Keep the questions coming. I'm going to be dancing. Uh-oh. I should have gotten rid of the ladder that's behind me, because I'm sure you can see my ladder in my messy office. I guess I should have cleaned up a little beforehand, or put fairy lights up or something. Okay. Thanks, Nicole. Oh, we can't see him. Uh-oh. I don't know what's going on here. Sorry, technical difficulties. You know how that goes. Why don't we bring, if you've got questions for Jerry while we're kind of filling in some time here, we can move some of that up. So if other folks have questions for Jerry, why don't we do that? If we want to pull him in while we work on the other technical difficulties we're having. Let's bring in Jerry again. Can we do that? Let me just find out. There he is.
Hi again.
And yeah, we do have a question for you up here.
Okay.
I don't see it, but I'll read it to you, which is, how long did it take for you to query New Kid?
You know what's interesting is I had gotten an invite through a mutual friend to go down to Scholastic and just kind of meet them and introduce myself. And when I was there, I was able to pitch the idea in person. And then they liked it. And then they showed me some of the other great books like Smile by Raina Telgemeier. And then that gave me the idea of the format. And then I worked over it for a few months and then got an agent and then ended up at HarperCollins. Oh, glad I was able to fill in. So it's back out now, right?
All right. All right.
All right.
All right. Hi, Keith.
Hi,
I know.
Lisa. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. I'm just sitting here patiently and quietly. So, I
Well,
don't
we
know.
get introduced anyway, so you can dig right in if you want to.
All right.
All right.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks too to my my good pal Jotham Barella, who's a total force in the literary world. And Jerry, that was really terrific and inspiring. I wish I had thought to bring pictures. This novel is set, as Lisa said, it's set in Connecticut's tobacco country, north of Hartford. And if you can imagine, I could have had pictures, I suppose, of the cheesecloth nets that the shade tobacco grows under, or some of those beautiful chestnut sheds. In this novel, Cole Callahan has come back. He grew up in East Granby, but he's come back to Connecticut for the first time in 30 years to oversee the dismantling of a shed. This chestnut that these sheds are made of is highly prized. It's beautiful, beautiful wood, great to work with. And of course, most of the chestnut was wiped out, and almost all of it wiped out in a blight in the beginning of the 20th century. So these sheds that come down, like all the sheds you may know out by Kennedy Road, by the airport, a beautiful collection of sheds came down a year or so ago. And Jotham actually just sent me a picture of, I don't know, an office park or something going up on that site. So he's come back first time in 30 years. And here, this is on what I'm going to read, a short scene, his first day back in Connecticut. And Cole Callahan is leaving the site of the shed in a car. He's newly separated from his wife, Nikki, working toward a divorce. And they have a 15-year-old son, Daniel. This is near the beginning of the book. Driving past foreclosed houses in their half-suspended, half-built state, he flips the vents so the AC blows straight on him. He presses his palm into the steering wheel. The swollen red spots soar from the splinter, and then presses even harder so the pain flows to his molars and the base of his spine. He checks his phone, but there's no message from Nikki. She's putting on coffee now, or maybe stepping out of the shower. Almost from the moment her eyes open in the morning, she sings. Nina Simone, Cowboy Junkies, Bonnie Raitt. Her memory for lyrics is astounding. For 20 years, Cole woke most mornings to Nikki brushing her hair at her bureau and quietly singing Marmalade rhymes, flying too high with some guy in the sky. Never a trace of performance or self-consciousness. She drifts into melodies as easily as Cole drifts into daydreams, in his case, often dark recollections. Sometimes, for no reason he can identify, his blood starts racing, like the pain from his palm now shooting up his arm and pooling in the back of his mouth. Sometimes it's fear that Daniel might be in trouble, or disgust at himself for losing Nikki, or a nagging suspicion of looming secrets. He spoke of that night to almost no one for 10 years, as if he jumped town, and what happened here, his entire childhood, didn't stow away with him. The beatings were always a secret until his father killed her. And then the truth spread like fire. But when Cole left for the West Coast, he snapped the latches closed and left all the secrets behind, like the footlocker full of clothes and trophies and souvenirs he'd stored in his grandmother Tilly's attic. A decade later, that night had almost become a secret to himself. By now, honestly, he mixes up his memories of that night with Nikki's retelling. She's the one who sensed when the time felt right to tell their friends, good friends who she thought should know. She decided it was important for Cole to have it out in the open. But even if she's right, that it's good for him to let in some light, the story she told makes him uncomfortable. She made him out to be a hero, beating his father off of her, trying to protect his mother, trying to stop it when he knows it wasn't like that at all. He listens, accepts the sympathy and hand-wringing and pats on the back, endures the long silence, then slaps the table and jumps up. Okay, he'd say, who wants Marionberry pie? He never resented Nikki for talking about that night, but when she left and he started meeting new people, women to be precise, he didn't know how to tell the story himself, and it could be one of the reasons why nothing clicked with any of them. The truth is he has plenty of options. Within weeks of Nikki moving out, 2 weeks seems to be the official mourning period for a marriage pronounced dead. He was getting calls from friends, mostly female friends, who knew a wonderful or brilliant or drop-dead gorgeous woman. A landscape architect, a potter, an ER doctor, a lawyer, a yoga/Pilates instructor. There were Stumptown coffee dates and drinkable chocolate at Cacao, dinners in the Pearl, shows at the Schnitz, afternoon rendezvous at Powell's Books, and bike rides through Forest Park, winery loops down the valley. After the strained and angry final months with Nikki, it was all light and fun, even thrilling, but the time would come in their shared divulgences when the lovely woman sitting across the table from him, open and generous, wine glass at her lips, would ask about his childhood, and they would have already become too intimate for his usual sidesteps. But he wouldn't know how to tell the story, and he didn't know the story. And she'd lower her glass and sit back in her chair, sensing his dishonesty. It's early morning in Portland. He conjures Nikki in her sunny kitchen, singing The Last Chance Texaco. She's sprinkling cinnamon over oatmeal, slicing on strawberries and tossing in a handful of caramelized walnuts. Daniel's standing at the toaster, reading texts, wearing the robe. It had been Cole's robe, which Nikki bought him a few years ago for Christmas. The following winter, when Daniel had a bad flu, he took the robe off the bathroom hook and lay wrapped up in it on the couch in a cold sweat for a week. When he recovered, there was no discussion whatsoever. Daniel kept the robe through the spring when Cole and Nikki began couples counseling, kept it through the summer when Nikki went on yoga retreats to Baja and Vancouver Island, and kept it for good when she moved into her own apartment over a chocolate shop with a second bedroom for him every other week. Cole's foot lays off the accelerator as he approaches the house, surprised again that it looks so much the same, so perfectly preserved in his memory. He hadn't intended to drive down Old Newgate Road, or at least not stop. But then he glimpses Phil, sitting on the front steps, his arms crossed over his knees, his head resting on his arms, and his pulse flutters. Only once has he seen his father sitting like this, when he found him that night. He hits the brakes and swings into the driveway. All right, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I know. That's the cliffhanger for sure. So I just want to ask you a couple things, and then we'll move on. But there's so much tragedy in this book. I mean, there's a lot of tragedy. It's a small rural town in Connecticut. Lots of old business to settle when Cole comes back with people left behind. But I guess my question is, could you have set this book anyplace else, or could it only have been set where it is?
I love that question because no, I mean, not a chance. I feel like the prison, sort of the prison background and American history as the kind of dark and Old Newgate Prison, as probably a lot of people know, it was brutal to prisoners in a way that we can't even imagine these days. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, it's a tourist site in East Granby. The tobacco as an agricultural industry that hasn't changed at all in all of these years. And in fact, it hasn't changed really in 100 years, barely. And that part of Cole's going back and part of his memory and I guess the challenges to his memory is this idea that he thought he could leave, you know, as we all do, we think we can leave our problems behind and they'll kind of solve themselves, and then we can go back and everything will be okay now because we've grown and we're smarter and better. But in fact, they're just waiting there for us. And so that's something I think we all know, but I hope that the book dramatizes that and evokes that in new and interesting ways for us. So for me, no, it absolutely had to be this this background and this place. And I think that's one of, if we had more time, I could probably come up with 5 or 6 other reasons. But I think that's right.
Yeah, it evokes a lot of memories. I grew up in a tobacco town too. You know, the town I grew up in Cromwell. So there's a lot of those tobacco fields in Cromwell. That whole Connecticut River Valley. So when I was reading it, I recognized those. It evokes those places for me. So, you know, if anybody's over 50, let's say, who knows those places in Connecticut that are disappearing? You know, it is, for better or for worse, it's a way of life that's disappearing. So it's really interesting.
And there's two, as you know, Lisa, there's 2 narrative threads in here. There's the 2009 and there's the 1979. And as the novel goes, when Cole is 15, so it's the summer of the murder and the summer of him coming back. And as the novel goes on, the distinction between past and present really starts to blur, or even almost disappear. And some of that is related to all those people who are still, all these people he meets again after 30 years who he hasn't seen in that time. Also seem to be there waiting for him.
Yeah, ready to haunt. Oh, gosh. All right. So is there anything else we should be keeping an eye out for? Just a closing question in terms of any new products, new books that you have coming out?
It's going to be, I wish I could say, look next week. It's going to be a while, but my new novel is set in Ukraine. Also a book that I think could be set nowhere else. And I'm really excited about it. I'm just all about Ukraine now. I live in Ukraine. It'll be a couple of years for sure.
We'll keep an eye out. We'll be scouting.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And again, everyone, here we go. Here's a copy of Old Newgate Road. Everybody's looking. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you, Lisa.
Bye-bye. And Marco Ruffala, you're here to see us too. I'm going to introduce Marco. He's a first-generation Sicilian-American novelist, musician, and writer for award-winning tabletop role-playing games. His debut novel, How Fires End, won the 2020 Connecticut Book Awards honorable mention in fiction. So welcome, Marco.
Thank you for having me. So my novel, How Fires End, is a Sicilian-American family saga inspired by my father's stories of his life in Sicily during and after the Second World War. In the novel, A Vendetta and a Curse follow 2 families from a hillside village in World War II Sicily to Middletown, Connecticut in the 1980s. And I'm just going to start right from the beginning with Nella. I had 3 brothers, she began, but now Nella took a deep breath, held it in, let it out slow. Now I am the last Vassallo. After me, there will be no more. But our families, yours and mine, they were there in the beginning with the statue. She paused to sip her hot cocoa. The boy watched her, hungry for more. He didn't move, not even to brush the curls of unkempt dark hair from his eyes. Her face wrinkled into a smile, and she set the cup down, still holding it with both hands. She continued, not stopping until the cup had long grown cold. My father told my brothers and me the story of how the statue of Saint Sebastian came to the village of Malili, the village we once called home. Like so many stories, this one started with danger. A ship was caught in a furious storm and ran aground in Megara Bay. The hull cracked open on the rocks, and the waves pushed our saint ashore. All the sailors survived. They thanked their cargo for their lives, but none of these men could lift the statue to carry it off. Word spread first among the shepherds, then to the local villages and cities, until news reached the bishop of Syracuse. In 3 days, he came with clergy and a crew of men to claim the saint. Again, the saint was too heavy to lift. From all over the province, people gathered on the beach, waiting their turn to try to break the spell and lift the statue. Some of the men built a fire. Some of the women cooked. At night they prayed, and in the day their prayers failed them. When the procession from Melilli arrived, our priest claimed the statue, saying, "Since the making of the world, Saint Sebastian has been painted here on the grotto wall in our village, here before even Sebastian himself was born. This is Melilli, the martyr Sebastian, tied to a tree and porcupined with Roman arrows." Then our men raised the statue on a wooden pallet and placed the poles upon their shoulders, and a great cheer went up among them as all the clergy prayed and made the sign of the cross. "E chiamamolo paesano," they shouted, "prima Dio essa Mastiano." He is one of our own. First God, and then Saint Sebastian. Another cheer seized the men, and they carried the saint home. Our ancestors, a Vassallo and a Morello, among the bearers. Our families held hands and sang together, bringing their patron saint home to Melilli. In the piazza, on the ridge overlooking the bay, their knees buckled. The men cried out. A force had suddenly burdened them with a weight they could no longer carry. The priest kissed the wooden crucifix around his neck and said, "No man can shoulder the might of God." So they left the statue there and built a church around it. This was May 1414. As children, my brothers and I loved that story. As children, we believed, as everyone believed in those days, that Saint Sebastian would protect the people of Melilli forever. When earthquakes destroyed much of our village, it was by his glory our families lived to marvel, the statue unharmed among the ruins. Etna erupted. We prayed to him and our homes were spared. He saw us through all the wars and years of unrest and revolt in our history. Saint Sebastian always keeps us safe. He will always keep us safe. My father said these words as we hid in the cave, the war raging just outside. Gunfire cracked the air. Bombs whistled as they fell from the sky. Beneath our feet, the ground trembled. The cave shook like it might come down on top of us any minute. In the back, our mother prayed her rosary before the ancient painting of the saint on the cave wall. She wanted me, her only daughter, by her side. But I wanted to work with my father and brothers. We hulled a bushel basket of almonds, the only food left to eat. All around us, Germans and Allies fought. Such noise as you would never imagine possible. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. I was going to ask a couple things. In the book, in other parts of the book are connected with Middletown. The percentage of the book, would you say maybe, I don't know, half of it maybe takes place in Middletown as well?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, some give or take. So can you tell me a little bit about how you built the bones of How Fires End in Middletown?
Well, so most of the Sicilian families, if not all of them in Middletown, where I grew up, immigrated from Melilli, Sicily. And Melilli is a hillside village on the east side of the island of Sicily, between Augusta in the north and Syracuse in the south. And my father was a child in Melilli during the Second World War, when the Germans occupied the village and the Allies swept through. And he carried the childhood war trauma with him to Middletown when he immigrated there as a young man in his late 20s. And the Second World War wasn't just something that I read about in school or in history books. It was in our home, in our relationships, and in the stories that my father told me about his life in Sicily. And so for me, Middletown and Melilli are two sides of the same coin. They're two communities that are interconnected. And you can see the influence of that all around Middletown, whether it's St. Sebastian Church and the festival that they hold every spring in honor of their patron saint, Sebastian, or Viquito's Italian Ice, which is the best Italian ice in the state, in my opinion. And every year, my father took me to the festival in Middletown of St. Sebastian, and he would tell me the story of how the statue came to Melilli in a shipwreck, and then he would tell me about the replica of the statue in Middletown that a man created from memory, which is like an expression of how much he loved and missed his home and its traditions. And seeing the statue carried out of the church during the feast would often reduce people to tears. So one man always cried and shouted his exultations the loudest, throwing his hands up in the air, asking for the saint's blessing. And I had never seen a grown man, especially a Sicilian man, cry before openly in public. And so as a boy, I asked my father what was wrong with him. Why was he crying? And my father said, oh, he lost everything in the war, and afterward he had only bad luck. So every year at the feast, he asks the saint for help to make life a little easier for him. And that stuck with me, as most of my father's stories did. And there was a story there in our community in Middletown, one that I had never read before, but I didn't know what to do with it until I took a trip to Sicily with my father in 2001. And being in Melilli, walking the same cobblestone streets that he had spoken about, sitting under the same tree he slept under as a boy, visiting the graves of his cousins who died in 1943, playing with an unexploded shell, seeing the caves my family hid in during the war, and seeing the original statue of St. Sebastian as well. I found the answer to a question that I didn't even know to ask. What is the Sicilian American story that is not about the mafia? And it's about the people of a small, close-knit community like Melilli, ordinary working class, poor people whose lives were deeply affected by the war. And it's about those same people who came to Middletown and created a new community for themselves while carrying their homelands and their traumas with them. And it's about their children who straddle the question of what it means to be American and what it means to be Sicilian, and how you reconcile the two. But more importantly, what do you do with the weight of your parents' personal history? So from that experience, characters grew, each from a different part of that community in Middletown. The Sicilian immigrants, their children, the outsiders who, through time and shared hardship, became like a family. So those were the bones, I think, of the book, and how I thought of them as I was putting it together.
Yeah, that's quite the story. And, so much of that sounds familiar to me. I live in Middletown. I grew up in the next door, and I know every place that's there. So thank you for making it come alive like that. That it's so evokes so many real emotions. So, and I thank you for that. So,
thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, our next presenter. Thank you. Stick around now. I think there's some questions. I'd like to introduce next, I'm going to introduce Ann Perkins, and she's an award-winning historian and expert, Ann Perkins Gardner, in higher education. She won the Littauer, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, award for academic excellence during her time at Harvard. Her first book, Yale Needs Women, is the 2020 Connecticut Book Awards winner in the nonfiction category. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Lisa. And what a lovely thing to be able to listen to Jerry and Keith and Marco read from their work. That's just been a wonderful thing. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Margot as well. So as Lisa said, mine is the nonfiction work in our roster of books tonight. Yale Needs Women tells the story of the first women undergraduates at Yale. They arrived just over 50 years ago, 1969, to a campus that had been all male for the previous 268 years. I'm going to read a brief excerpt in a moment, but first I wanted to tell you just a little more about this remarkable group of young women who broke the gender barrier at Yale. The New York Times called them superwomen, but most of them were just teenagers. They came from all over the country, from Cleveland and Baltimore, Los Angeles and Houston, and they came from Connecticut, from Danbury and Bristol, Hartford, New Haven, West Haven, 24 cities and towns in Connecticut. Some of them were wealthy, but others had to patch together their tuition through financial aid jobs and summer work. Most of them were white, but 40 of those first women students were African American, 13 were Asian American, 3 were Latina. They were smart and they were tough. That's how Yale picked them. Girls who had lived abroad, girls who had suffered a hardship, girls with 4 brothers. That's who Yale looked for that first year. I interviewed one of the 2 administrators who chose that first group of women, and here's what he told me. There was no point in taking a timid girl and putting her in this environment because it could crush you. He knew what he was talking about. Yale called itself co-ed, but it put in place a gender quota that limited women to just 13% of the student body that first year. And so they all learned what it was like to be oddities. As one of them wrote, "When I raised my hand to speak in class, the guys turned to stare at me as if the furniture itself had offered an opinion." But they were smart and they were tough. That's how Yale picked them. So I'm going to take you back to February 1970. We're still in the very first year of coeducation. And this is a brief introduction to one of the first protests that these women organized. The staff of the Yale Alumni Office was quite pleased with itself. The annual Midwinter Alumni Day would take place on Saturday, February 21st. And this year's event looked to be the most successful one yet. More than 1,000 alumni and their wives were coming, the largest turnout ever. The group would be feted at a white tablecloth lunch in the imposing university dining hall. Yale president, Kingman Brewster, would speak. Awards would be given. And then the gathering would move next door for the grand finale, the dedication of the new Becton Engineering and Applied Science Center, during which Brewster would be handed the keys to the building by the man who had donated the money for it. Henry P. Becton was the perfect alumnus, loyal to Yale, remarkably generous, and very, very rich. Moreover, Becton had 2 children at Yale, Jeffrey, a senior, and Cynthia, one of the 230 women freshmen. The men in the Yale Alumni Office would have been wise to ask Cynthia Becton about how things were going at Yale. But in all of their planning, this was one step they forgot. So on the Friday before this alumni lunch, Cynthia and her roommate, Margaret Kuhn, get together for lunch with some of their friends. And by the time the meal is done, they've hatched a plan to make sure that Yale's alumni know what it is like to be one of the first women at Yale. At 1 p.m. the next day, a throng of business-suited alumni, their wives in cocktail dresses beside them, entered the university dining hall and took their seats. The guests began eating and chatting among themselves. None of them noticed when one of the bursary students who had served them their lunch opened a locked door behind the podium and let the girls in. 40 girls, all freshmen like Margaret and Cynthia, entered the dining hall. Some of them were carrying signs. End women's oppression. Women, up from under. While most of them wore jeans, Margaret had put on a dress and pulled her long hair back neatly with a bow. She ascended the podium where Kingman Brewster and other dignitaries were seating and, using the calmest voice she could muster, asked Brewster a question. "Mr. Brewster, I'd like to address the alumni for a few minutes. Would that be okay?" Brewster said yes and handed Margaret the mic. I imagine that is a decision he regretted for many days to come. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. And it was Ann Gardner Perkins, by the way. I'm very sorry.
No worries.
audience. And to you. So women were first admitted in 1969 to Yale, and it seems like a lifetime ago. Of course, it's not. You've learned their stories, and you too went to Yale. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I arrived 8 years after that first group of women, and remarkably, no one talked about them. It was as if Yale had always been co-ed. And so, about 7 years ago, I started wondering why I didn't know anything about them and what this was like, and started looking into it and found that all of the books that had been written about this had been written solely from sources reflecting the voices of men. No one had bothered to ask the women themselves. And so once I started meeting them and hearing their perspective on what happened, I knew this just was a story I had to write.
You had to get it out. Yeah. And what was if the story wasn't even really told by the time you arrived, what was the difference between it? Not the difference, that's the wrong way to phrase it. What immense changes there must have been from the time that they arrived and when you arrived? I mean, what kind of...
Yeah, I would say the main one was this one that that starts with this protest that I read with Margaret and Cynthia, which is pushing Yale to end this gender quota that limits the number of women. I mean, I was really shocked to find that they'd actually put a quota in place, but that through lots of protest of not just the women, but the entire student body and some very brave individual members of the faculty and administration, there succeed in overturning that quota after the first 4 years. So by the time I get there, women are 40% of the student body. And so that for the white women, that sort of spotlight and invisibility of being an extreme minority is gone. So that was, I would say, the huge difference. The faculty, by the time I went there, was still almost all men. I mean, I had 2 women professors my entire time there. Yale still lags behind the nation in terms of its number of women in the top positions in the faculty. But it was that difference in the student body that was really marked.
Well, it's a remarkable story, and I suggest everyone, and I forgot to show up Marco's book a moment ago, but here's a copy. I don't know. Are you seeing the reverse of this? It's Yale Needs Women anyway, and you can see it.
Seeing it perfectly. Seeing it perfectly. Oh, and let me, well, I don't know if people can see it while you hold it up. I love to tell people this, that we wanted to capture on the cover that sense of transition from this all-male institution to one in which women were present. But that group at the top is the class of 19 Yale cheerleaders, and one of those cheerleaders is Prescott Bush, George W. Bush's grandpa. So.
How about that? It's a small world, huh? No, this is fantastic, and I urge you all to read it as well as the rest of the books. And please, if you have any questions for Anne, add them into the Ask a Question box at the bottom, and she'll answer them in a few moments. We've got one more, and thank you, Anne.
You're very welcome.
We've got one more presenter for this evening. This is Margot Schilpp, and she is the 2020 Connecticut Book Award winner in the poetry category with her volume called Afterswarm. Hey, Margot. Her other works in poetry include Civil Twilight, Laws of My Nature, and The World's Last Night. So thank you, Margot.
Thank you. I am honored to be here. Really happy to show read some poems to everyone tonight, but also before I start reading, I want to just say thank you to the Connecticut Literary Festival, to Jonathan Borello, to the English department at CCSU and Real Artways, and especially to you, Lisa, for arranging the reading, and to Christiana Torres for technical help. And I guess I'd also like to thank the readers who came before me, because that was really a wonderful thing to hear. So I thought I'd read 3 poems tonight, all from Afterswarm. The first poem I'd like to read is an abecedarium, which is a poem that's constructed using an alphabetical scheme. And this poem is called OCD. Another reflexive moment scared me into submission. Once I noticed the calorie count on the box. Before, I'd been scouring the sink with Clorox. Corners on our beds had to be turned down neatly. Clothes had to be folded precisely. The ant traps had to align perfectly, equidistant from the baseboard, or I wouldn't be able to sleep. Not if a Q-tip poked higher than its neighbors, or the rug's fringe was tangled, or there were water spots on the dog's bowl, and even a wrinkle in the trash can's lining bag could send me into a rough kind of orbit, spinning out into the elliptical path 1 degree wider each time until its course was irrevocably off and the world would end. Just like that. Don't think less of me. Every time I admit my problems, I lose a friend or two. Frankly, it's probably better that they're gone. Grace follows a path, and for me that path is orderly, strict, painful. How I got this way is impossible to say. I was a normal kid in every way, just arranging my pencils from lightest to darkest. Kids can be cruel, though. Little differences can seem big. Major deviations from average can be met with cruelty or fireworks. No one ever asked me over to play, though I know now I was not the only one. Once, in a fit of pique, I asked Camille why her notebook was sticky, which wasn't very nice. People these days don't avoid me, though they know I may rehang their coats or straighten silverware. Quilts may be refolded, rods may be shined. Somewhere in a mirror universe, the reverse of all this exists, and I'm flopped on a lazy boy, eating Doritos, wiping my cheesy fingers on the arm. Toilet tissue trails from my heels as I walk down the hall. Under the recliner, enough pen caps and hair and dust to drive the other me slightly mad. Victory in this place to disorder, to leaving things piled up on tables, to dishes in the sink, and never another stain stick, white glove, or can of pledge. When I imagine paradise, though, it's a place where evenly spaced palm trees, boulevards wide enough to turn a car around neatly, and crisp fabric shield us from that other place, the one where disorder reigns. Exactly where paradise is, I can't say, but it's fronted, squared, and waxed. Zippered slipcases rule. The second poem that I want to read tonight is more imagistic, less narrative, and it's called Pygmalion Effect. I rest in the flush of a sunset. There aren't words on the tongue that fasten humanity's shawl tighter than thank you. But the light turns itself down and teaches me to swear. On the rocks below, several thousand graves. Or not graves, but the outlines of people who've wrestled through here. Recalibrate the dusk, for I've fallen into disrepair, and when it's not quite dark, I look my best. That's when we'll meet. Hour of lavender, hour of blur. Pay no attention to the voices, warning of pestilence, famine. Only the crying is real. Far away seems farther away than before, when trees arced over marble and a fence was fastened to the field. Delicate leaves and hardier shadows trembled. Everything is the only shape it will ever be. And then I think in honor of the pandemic, which we've all been living through and will continue to live through for a little bit longer, hopefully not too much longer, I want to read a poem called Till It's Gone. There was so much travel. I sickened of scenery. I longed for a view I could count on to be 2 days the same. In my head, a reel clicks and shows me still moments lost. I wear a nubby pale pink coat. I miss my Siamese cat. The crank of my bedroom window sticks, then comes loose all at once. One stone in our fireplace wriggles, a little like a loose tooth. I spend weeks pretending I can't walk and must prance down our teak hall to move from room to room. Time seemed not to pass at all. Yet here is the everyday everything, the plans for meals and the morning's rush. There are appointments, classes to meet, grading and planning, making sure everyone is where she belongs each day. But there are shimmers, the roof of a chalet in Innsbruck, geraniums blooming in the balcony window planters, a plate of salami, some dry brown bread, and an egg standing in a cup. embroidered napkins folded and waiting. Now the world burns and grows, beauty syncopated against loss, and I let in only shards. Was that, or is this, the world I love? Thank you.
Thank you. Oh gosh. And I'm gonna ask a dumb question because I have to say I'm not a well-versed in reading poetry, and I find when I'm reading reading your poetry and others as well, I find myself kind of filling in the gaps as I'm reading it, kind of filling in. I suppose it's from my own life's experience that I'm filling in those gaps of things that are within what's written. And I just wanted to make that comment because I don't, have to be candid about these things. But can you tell me, is that typically how people read poetry? I guess I don't know. I'm asking that question. So.
I think it's kind of typically what people do, and I think it's also related to the way that I write poetry, which is I'm filling in little pieces of experiences or memories or observations that sort of get woven into something, but it isn't necessarily an experience I've had, but it's combined with a bunch of smaller pieces, and so I think that's the way people read poetry.
Yeah, it's not laid out. It's almost like reading. This sounds a weird comparison, maybe, but reading a piece of flash fiction, and you're filling in those gaps of things that you might not have. You have an experience, and then it's kind of filling in those gaps to complete the story, if you will, in that narrative. And this is a little bit of a different thing. So yeah, I'm not crazy. I feel better about that. Okay. And I guess my other question was that again, for those who want to know, what's the best way to read poetry? I know it sounds weird, but it's a different kind of mindfulness, perhaps, as you're reading poetry rather than reading a straight narrative. And I guess it's a different experience in reading poetry, I would say.
I think I agree with that too, that it takes a different kind of attention, and maybe, it's the kind of attention that we all can develop now because we have, these very brief interactions with electronics that we sort of dip in and out of. I mean, I think that's in some ways good for poetry because poetry does allow you to come in for a minute and then kind of leave. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I'm finding as I'm reading more of it, because I read more of it now than I ever did, and it is sort of, it's a removed experience from that, those distractions, if you will, of reading. I'm trying to read my my texts that are coming in to help, to do the rest of this event today, but I'm reading it through and I'm getting distracted by it. And I think if you're reading that poetry, it really is an experience where you've really got to pay attention. You can't not pay attention to it. And I think that's you can't skim through and go, I'll just skim to the end. I'll go to a couple pages and see what happens next. You don't have that luxury with poetry. And that's the lesson for me, I guess, and maybe for others, I don't know. But I thank you. This is a lovely experience. And thank you for answering my questions. And I'm going to try to figure out how we're going to handle these questions for other folks. If anybody has, let me just check and see if there's anything here for you while you're here already. Let's see. Can you see those questions too at the bottom? You might be able to.
Yes.
Okay. There is one for you. It's the last one on the bottom. And here we go. Yeah. How do you spell the name of the form that your first poem used?
So I've put it in there. I believe that's how it's spelled, Occidarian, but
okay.
I actually honestly first had it wrong and it corrected it to that. So
no, of course it did, right? That's what it does. Okay, cool. Any other? I'm going to bring Jerry back up here. Thank you, Margot. I've got, I think Jerry's got a couple questions, and I want to bring him back in, but thank you. And here's, by the way, I wanted to tell you, I love the cover. It's a beautiful cover. The poem that you have for that cover, it's the first one, right? Yeah,
Yes.
it's great. Thank you. All right. So Jerry's got some questions. We're going to bring him back. Hi, Jerry.
Hey, that was great.
Thank you, everybody. It's terrific. Let me, can you see the questions, or would you like me to read them to you?
I would love for you to read them.
Okay. So for Jerry, have you noticed any changes in trends with MG, YA fiction since you started writing New Kid?
I have definitely seen more opportunities for authors of color to write stories that are not necessarily steeped in misery. You know, like it's always really been a challenge. Like a lot of the books traditionally I've seen in my lifetime up until recently have been, especially African-American characters, have been slavery, civil rights, or police brutality, things like that. And it, I think, has started to loosen up, and I'm hoping that winning things such as the Newbery and the Kirkus will get publishers to be like, hey, you know, we really can sell some books, you know, that aren't the traditional. Not that those books aren't important, but so is, you know, Diary of Wimpy Kid. You know, so I would like to see more Wimpy Kid characters as kids of color. Just doing regular stuff, eating ice cream, going to the mall, you know, just regular stuff.
And it's not dystopian. You know, some of those dystopian ones, after a while, just gets a little grim. I don't know.
No, absolutely. A lot. If you take a look, like even my worst fear is to grow up, wake up one day and be a parent in a Disney cartoon, because they all get the worst fate possible. They never make it to the end.
They just don't make it to the end. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, there's a couple of other questions here for you while we're here. This one is, I'd be interested to hear Jerry describe the different stages he experienced with writing, illustrating, querying, publishing, and promoting New Kid. How long was the journey from starting the first draft to becoming a bestseller?
Well, I basically, I pitched the idea way back in 2014, and that was something that it was just kind of a loose pitch, you know, just to kind of see, like, you know, if people were interested, you know. And then I had gotten a contract from another publisher, and I used that to kind of like build it up a little bit, you know. And I'll actually show you a screen share. So by 2017, the entire book was laid out like this. Do you see this on the left side? It was all sketched out like that. And then I signed with HarperCollins in January 2017, and I handed the book in full color, like you see on the right, in February of 2018. So it took about 13 months of 15-hour days to tackle this 250-page monster. And then once Harper had it, it took another year before it even came out. So I handed it in February 2018. It came out February 2019. And then January of this year, I won the Newbery, and then I finished Class Act in 8 months instead of 13 months. And that literally I handed in June of this year, and it came out in October. It only took 4 months for that to come out because they just really wanted to capitalize on it. So it was amazing how quickly everyone. I'm shocked that the ink on the pages is dry.
Wow. Wow. Let me just see if there's anything else. I'm going to bring in, I'm just giving instructions blindly here. I'm going to bring in, if you don't mind, I'm going to bring in Anne and Keith and Marco to ask this question, because this is a little bit of a broader question for a different group of authors. Why don't I bring those three in to ask this question, and they can all take their turn. Thank you, Jerry. Oops, have I lost people here?
Hello.
Coming in. Hey, who've I got? I've covered your head with the thing. Is there anybody else? You're joining. We got more people. Okay. Because this is a broader question for a bunch of people. Is Keith joining us too? I think we can have 4. But I'll start to read aloud and we can decide. Let's see. For all the authors, the question is, for all the authors, with the increasing impact of social media and publishing, does it still help to be in New York or the Northeast for networking opportunities?
I'm not a networker. I probably should be. You know, I guess, and I probably am in the control group of this very small percentage of Americans who had never been on social media before. But my agent said, you have to do something. So I started a Twitter account once the book came out. And I actually enjoy that more than I thought. But for me, the success of the book has had to do with the care in writing it. It has nothing to do with the social media that followed it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that networking. Well, who's networking now these days, right? Except we're doing it all, virtually. Right. Yeah, Marco, what do you think?
I don't think it's necessary to live in the city, to live in New York or to be in the Northeast. I mean, I'm also a pretty terrible networker. I'm an introvert with a bundle of neuroses. Getting around people and talking to them is not something I enjoy. But especially, I think now with the pandemic, I think we've all seen that we can work from anywhere. We can connect with anyone, anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in a particular location to write a book and to find an agent and to get it published.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that I agree, except that it's so much easier to say that when you live in Connecticut than when you live in Oregon. And, I feel a long way from New York, and for a lot of years I would actually make just a dedicated trip once a year to lunch with my agent, lunch with my editor, and that's kind of, I mean, maybe that's part of the answer to the question. That's sort of faded and it feels less important now. But it really I think it's nice to be within a day's drive of lunch in New York. I think that helps. Not necessary, not essential, but I think it helps.
This question is for Anne. Looking around here on me. Did Yale have a brief flirtation with Vassar about merging?
It did. I think this is your question, Keith. So what you need to understand is that Yale's president, Kingman Brewster, did not want Yale to go co-ed. But the problem was that Yale was watching the numbers of students who were saying yes to Harvard over Yale go up. And when they asked those students, why did you turn Yale down? The answer was that, well, at Harvard, I can just turn to the Radcliffe girl next to me in class and get a date. Whereas at Yale, I have to drive 2 hours to Mount Holyoke or to Vassar to have a girlfriend. This, of course, there's a whole weird class element to this as well, because they could have gone to Albertus Magnus or Southern Connecticut College. But for the right type of Yale women, they wanted a woman who went to a school like Vassar. And so Yale's idea was, let's tell Vassar to sell their campus, bring them and their endowment down here, build a new campus in New Haven, and then there can be women nearby, but we won't actually have to admit them. So they spent a whole year on that plan until Vassar voted to turn them down and stay where it was. Yeah.
And did Vassar turn it down? Is it your sense they turned it down to maintain their identity and keep their campus, or were there other factors? Were those the main factors?
Yes, but Vassar is multifaceted. So Vassar's president was a man who was actually very close socially to Brewster. Brewster and his wife used to go on holidays with the Vassar president. And so he loved that idea, but it was the Vassar alumni and the Vassar women's faculty who put their foot down and said, no way. And Yale had also sort of intimated that that Vassar's women faculty probably would not be good enough to ever teach at Yale. And so that was something that stuck in their craw as well.
Can't imagine why. Okay, I've got one more question left here, and that's from Margot. So we need to bring Margot back. And thank you. And
all right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more question, and then we'll wrap it up here today. Well, Margot's joining us, yeah? I need to figure out how to do these things a little better, but is Margot still here? Or can I not see her? No. Oh, hi, Margot is still here. Can we pull Margot in? Just one more question. I'll read it aloud while she's being pulled in. And that question is, how do you decide when a poem is what? Ah, there you go. How do you decide when a poem is what you wanted it to be?
Wow. So I guess depending on the poem, for example, one of the poems I read tonight, The Abecedarian, it was easy to figure out when I was at least reaching the end of that because I was near the end of the alphabet. And there were things that had made it into the poem that I didn't expect, but I certainly knew that, you know, it had A and it had Z, and that would be kind of the shape of the poem. At other times, I think sometimes when I'm writing a piece, I think I'm going one place and it ends up entirely somewhere else. And I'm always grateful for that, partly because it's nice to go somewhere surprising. But I'm not sure I know how to answer the question other than that. I sometimes get somewhere that I didn't expect to be. And usually that's when I stop, because that's where I want to end.
Where it needs to be. Yeah. It's done. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if I've got any more here for you that have cropped up. Oh, uh-oh. I think I just went in a different direction. I don't know what I just did. Oh my goodness, I think I just kicked myself off.
I still see you.
Oh, okay. I'm in a different, I don't know what I did. Yeah, okay. I don't know how I did that. No, I think we've answered your question. That was there. Thank you, Margot.
Thank you.
I don't know how to end this. It's kind of like ending your poem. I don't know how to end this today. So,
we're at Z.
We're at Z. Exactly. At the end. And so I might need some assistance here to help me wrap up for the evening. But I do thank you, and I thank all of the authors who are here tonight, writers who have contributed to the Connecticut literary landscape, and I really appreciate what you've done and what you've achieved and accomplished. It's good for all of us. So thank you, and I don't know. Goodbye. Okay. Thank you, and yes, please visit next week. It looks like there's going to be another one, and that's it. So thank you.